Welcome to the first episode of CityCast, a podcast created by CityLAB students to inform the public about the work we do and the people we meet. In today's episode, we interview General Manager of Planning and Economic Development for the City of Hamilton, Jason Thorne. Here's Jason talking about current development in the city. So let's jump right in.
Some sort of point just need a building permit. Right. Like if you're doing if you've bought a commercial storefront on James Street and you're putting in a restaurant, chances are all you need is a building permit. That's a fairly straightforward process. You're dealing with just one of my teams, the building team. Bigger stuff, though, what we typically see is, in any given week, I'll probably have a meeting or two with somebody who's potentially interested in investing in building something. Some of them you can usually quickly determine are just what I would call tire kickers. They're kind of thinking, that you don't get the sense they're too serious. But there's enough of them that are actually, you get a sense that they're real. What Hamilton's been experiencing really quite recently, I'd say the last 2 years, is a lot of outside development interest. So most of the development that's happened is kind of in the downtown core. Well, historically, there was almost nothing happening. Then things started to pick up, but it was really local people doing the development. Now we're starting, the last probably 2 years, we've started to see the big players, the Mintos, the Tridells, the Daniels, these sorts of bigger companies, more Toronto-based companies starting to be interested in Hamilton, but they don't know Hamilton. So right. It's very common for them to kind of come and just sort of say, show me what's happening. Sometimes we'll do a little walking tour. We'll talk about where some of the activity is. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about what some of the assets and amenities are. They're always asking questions like, where's the LRT going to be? Right. They always want to know where the good restaurants are because that's a part of their marketing. Mm-hmm. And where are the potential land sales? So one of the biggest challenges for any developer is to actually find land that you can actually acquire. So often it's kind of at that stage, they'll want to understand what kinds of height permissions are we allowed? What's the planning process? How long does it typically take? They'll ask those sorts of questions. Sometimes we don't hear from them for months. Sometimes we don't hear from them for a year. Then they're starting to do their own thing, trying to lock up land. Once they've got land, then they will usually come to us and start kicking off the formal approvals process. So we've tried to make it as painless as possible as we can. So what we did was we actually, as the city, went and just pre-zoned the whole downtown and said, here's what's permitted. And we made it very open and we established heights. We said any building, the tallest a building can be is as tall as the Niagara Escarpment, which translates into about 30 stories. And we said, that's what you're allowed. You don't have to apply for it. You have that right away. So that can save a lot of time and save a lot of money. So now when they actually initiate the formal approvals process, we aren't talking about as much about density and use. We're just talking about things like traffic circulation, parking, landscaping, design, sort of more fine-grained stuff. Right. So once you get through that, your last step is always your building permits. And then typically a construction in the downtown core is probably a year or two of construction. We're typically about a 2-year construction. Right. So like I said, it usually starts off with a coffee with a couple of people somewhere, just trying to learn what the opportunities are in the city. And then we hope to kind of follow that through to eventually see shovels in the ground within a vast majority of development that happens is on private land. So we have no role in the selling of the land or what the conditions of that sale might be. Okay. It's very rare opportunities that come along once in a while where it's actually city-owned land. Okay.
And if it, like the West Harbor development, is there any sort of, once like the land is given to the developer, is there any sort of contract in place, like making sure that they're actually going to do what they say they're going to do? Or is it kind of like you're on?
So when it's our land, we have a lot more control. So if it's private land and our only role is just as approvals, provincial legislation is very restrictive on what we can and cannot require. So for example, you're not allowed to require green roofs. You're not allowed to require any sort of environmental performance. You're not allowed to require, even on architecture and design, it's a bit of a gray area. We kind of push them for good design, but you can only go so far because it's a private development. Mm-hmm. So we have limited regulatory authority as to what we can dictate. If it's our land, we have a lot more authority because we could say, well, we're going to sell it to you under the following conditions. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if people know the West Harbor area, so do you all know the site where Williams Pub is, the old Sarcoa restaurant, sort of the big, vast area of pavement. Right beside that is our new Pier 8 development. It's going to be about a 1,500 residential unit residential development. That was our land. So we took it to market in a competitive process, and we said, we want the best price, but we also we had a minimum requirement for 5% of the units had to be affordable housing. We had requirements around creation of the public realm and the park space. We had requirements around the architecture and design. We could kind of layer all that stuff in there because it was our land and we could just do that as a condition of sale. Each one of those requirements you put out there, like as soon as you say you want a certain amount of affordable housing, well, they're going to give you less money for the land. So all that stuff kind of costs us in the end. But that's what we did for Pier 8. We went international with a competition. We put it out for proposal. We had bids coming in from all over the place. And then we have a selection process where we actually choose the group that we ultimately chose is a group called Waterfront Shores. It's a consortium of architects and developers. And they're the ones who won the rights to develop it. And then we have them under a development agreement that requires them to construct according to everything they committed to when they won, which is where we landed on. Affordable housing was one of the big debates. So there were some who said, well, there should be 50% affordable housing. And there were some who should say, well, there should be no affordable housing. Let's just get the most money we can. We landed on a minimum requirement of 5% of units. Sustainability was another debate where, there were some who were saying, let's build a fully net zero community. Where we landed in the end was we had certain guidelines and requirements around greenscaping and low impact development. Not full net zero, but more than what traditional development would yield. So that was a whole public process to say, what criteria should we be evaluating by? Because if people are going to bid, they're bidding against a scorecard. What's on the scorecard became a significant public discussion. And by no means was there unanimity. Like it was in any community engagement process you're involved in, you're not going to get unanimity. You're going to get all sorts of different perspectives and opinions. And in the planning role, you kind of have to say, well, here's where we think we're going to land and what we're going to recommend.
Yeah, and I guess there's more pressure from the public in that way because at the end of the day, they're going to hold you accountable for who you let in to develop.
Yeah. So there's, again, because it was our process and our land, there's an expectation that a whole bunch of public good and public benefits will be done. Rightfully so. I fully agree with that. Mm-hmm. If it's a question of a private developer building on private land, like a typical condo anywhere around here, you don't have that luxury of being able to hold them against such a long list of criteria. Right. Our hands are much more tied in terms of what we can actually require them to do.
So here we have Jason talking about planning policies and what the city can and cannot do when new developments arrive in Hamilton.
Kind of now, where we're at right now in the LRT is we're in the procurement phase. So the province has shortlisted 3 big global consortiums as the potential people to build and construct it. And now everything happens behind closed doors where we're in sort of a confidential stage of them developing their proposals. They ask us some technical questions. We provide the answers. Their bids come in next year. So it's all a very kind of quiet behind the scenes process at the moment. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't that way a couple of years ago. And we very much talked about LRT. In some communities, LRT is a response to traffic congestion. You've got traffic choked in a way of getting cars off the road and getting more people onto transit to build an LRT. In Hamilton, it was less about traffic congestion. It was really more about economic development. It was more about the uplift, the economic uplift that could happen around LRT, especially around LRT stations. And there's pretty good precedents out there in other cities that you make a big investment like that in transit, you attract growth and you attract development, especially around the stations. So our focus always was on the economic development side. And we've seen that play out. Like I said, anytime a developer's coming into town and kicking tires and saying, I'm thinking of developing here, one of the first questions they ask is where are the LRT stations going to be? So that's a sign that they realize that there's value there. And we've seen construction happening. If you look at where some of the cranes are in the air right now, a lot of it is actually happening around where those future stations are going to be. So we're already kind of seeing the impact of that, even though the LRT is by no means finished or complete. Mm-hmm. One of the big concerns has always been the disruption during construction. To build an LRT line is probably 4 years of construction. Anybody who knows Waterloo knows it's very disruptive, and it has a big impact on local businesses. Anybody who knows Locke Street, what Locke Street's gone through, that was just 6 months? They had to rip up the whole street. They're replacing the trunk sewers under the street. So for 6 months, Locke Street was, all the businesses were open. The sidewalk stayed open. That's one of the requirements. You have to always have access to every storefront. Nobody can ever be blocked, but it just becomes a very not pleasant place to be. And Locke Street hurt. Like Locke Street, some businesses really hurt. Some may still not make it because of how much business you lose for 6 months. When you're a small business, you can't just sort of have 6 months of no activity and still survive. So that's true of any construction project. It's particularly true of LRT just because of how long of a construction period is. So again, there's some things that you can do. And we've been working with Metrolinx and with the Chamber of Commerce around business readiness programs. So even talking now, even though the impacts are still a couple of years away, what can businesses be doing now to kind of get ready for the impacts? There'll be some investments done in marketing and promotion about the businesses on the corridor. We will likely invest in things like some street festivals and events and those sorts of things to try to keep people coming to the area during the construction phase. But there's going to be impacts, and there's really not any great way of avoiding it that any time roads are going to be torn up for a period of time is going to have an impact. One of the negotiation points with the people who will be building it is, we're not going to let them tear up all 14 kilometers for the entire 4-year period. They'll have to do it in phases and segments, so that it's not like if you're a business, you're inconvenienced for the entire 4-year period. We want to keep those windows as small as possible, and you always will have to maintain access. You can never actually block someone off.
Right.
But yeah, that's a concern with any big infrastructure project. Concession Street went through it a couple of years back. Concession was the same as Locke. They ripped up the whole street, replaced all the sewers. In the end, it makes for a better street. It makes for a better environment for a business. It's just you got to do everything you can to try to make them survive that period.
Yeah. Jason comments on the development of the new arena in Hamilton.
So council had asked us to look at, we have an aging arena in Cops Cullis. I'll always call it Cops Cullis.
Yeah.
It's an aging arena, and it's not the best size for what it's used for. So it was built as a 17,000 seat hockey arena. What it's being used for is as a 5,000-6,000 seat hockey arena in an event space, and so it doesn't kind of perfectly meet those needs either way. So renovating and reusing that facility is still one of the options that's up for consideration. There's a lot of money that will take. Demolishing and building a new entertainment facility, and I also remember to call it entertainment facility because everyone talks about arena, but no one's talking about building just a single purpose arena. It's meant for, we actually have, in terms of revenue generation and the number of people using facilities, non-hockey uses are actually significantly more. If you look at all the concerts and events and Disney on Ices and monster trucks and all those sorts of things, it far outnumbers hockey. So we need a facility that it works for that as well. So demolishing, building something new. Council's talked about something in the range of, and we've done some work as well, that something in the range of probably about 10,000 seats is more the right sized fit for what our market is. And then we had a proposal come forward saying, well, what about looking at the mall site? So right now we're looking at all of those options. And it's an important decision because it is, there's not that many big infrastructure moves that a city can make. Like you don't build that many concert halls and convention centers and stadiums. A city of our size doesn't build a whole lot of those. So when you do build one, you really want to try to get it right in terms of ticking off as many boxes as possible. So for us, it's an important community asset. It's a really important economic development asset. So you want to put it in the place and design it in such a way that you're getting the most economic development impact. So that's what the discussion is going to be. There's pros of putting it at something like a mall site. One of the discussions around the mall site is with the changing face of retail, bricks and mortar retail shops are starting to struggle. So what is the future of our major regional mall site in the era of Amazon when the Forever 21s and the Searses and the Blockbusters are all starting to go out of business? How do we protect what's a really important tax-paying commercial center in the city? We've always identified the mall site as one of our major urban nodes in the city. So there's some arguments to be made on that side. In the downtown core, you've got proximity to where our hotels are, where our convention center is. You can get that synergies of all of those uses clustered together. You already have the parking, you already have the higher access transit use. So that's essentially what we've been tasked to come back to council with, is some thoughts as to that, all that range of option from essentially a do nothing or a do nothing and just kind of put some more investment into the existing facility to build a new facility. If you build a new facility, where do you build it?
Is something like determining transportation something that goes into that decision? So if you put it up on the mountain, are people from the downtown core able to get up there?
It's a big factor is anything like that, which is a major trip generator. You want to locate your trip generators where you have the best opportunity to capture as many of those trips through non-auto based modes. That becomes a big factor. Now on the mountain, the mall is sort of our key bus terminal, but it doesn't have the transit service that the downtown core has. But that has to be a big consideration. We don't want to have, tens of thousands of people going to an event if the only option to get there is by car.
Jason then touches on wealth distribution and the affordable housing crisis.
And it's more pronounced in a place like Toronto, which has, does about 10 times the amount of residential growth that we do. That creates enormous amounts of wealth. And I think the failure of delivering affordable housing has not been about each individual project not having a mandated number of affordable units in it, which actually legally we can't do through the development approvals process. It's about what has been done with that wealth. So that's a lot of wealth has been created. If you think of what has happened to property values in the city of Toronto, where people just by sitting in their homes for a couple of decades have made $1 million or $2 million. What have we done with that wealth? And I think the unfortunate thing is we haven't done a heck of a lot with that wealth. We haven't reinvested it into the people who didn't participate in that uplift. That wealth hasn't been redistributed in any meaningful sort of way. In fact, what a lot of that wealth has gone towards is keeping property taxes down, so that we continue to have this bizarre situation of somebody living in a home that used to be worth $400,000 and is now worth $2 million. Their property taxes haven't gone up a great deal. That's where, to me, there's a bit of a disconnect. And that becomes much more than just a municipal issue. Municipalities aren't in the business of wealth distribution. That's where the senior levels of government have to come in. But I look at it and say, how are we actually capturing some of that wealth creation and reinvesting it into the people who actually otherwise are going to get left behind? And you can't have a meaningful affordable housing argument if you don't get into those sorts of questions, because all the development happening in the downtown core is subsidized. So we as a city discount all the fees and charges. We offer zero interest loans. We offer various grants and things because the market itself will not support new development in the downtown core. So we are actually subsidizing it to try and kind of keep it happening. So to suggest that we can now start extracting that value as a municipality to invest in affordable housing, well, it's just not there. There's not value. There's not enough surplus value being created. We need to look at things like, how's income tax and asset wealth.
And to finish, Jason discusses the future of transportation in cities.
Specifically.
Well, you don't see any sort of radical changes in terms of, fixed rail transit.
Right.
I think is always going to be a thing. It certainly was part of our debate about, well, maybe we should just do nothing because autonomous vehicles are going to come along and they're going to solve all of our problems. My view is if you don't do anything because you think that the new technology is going to come and make it unnecessary, then you just never do anything, because in 5 years we'll be waiting for the thing that's only 5 years away. And then 5 years after that, you're waiting for So I think any city of any significant size and density, you need some fixed route transit, high capacity transit. There's just nothing else equates it. An autonomous vehicle with one person in it takes just as much space on the roadways as a regular vehicle with one person in it. It's just not an efficient way to move people around a big city. Autonomous vehicle is probably more efficient than what we have now, but I don't see them replacing the need for mass transit. Elon Musk can build all the little tunnels he wants in the world. All those vehicles are going to spit out somewhere, and that's the place where you're going to have the problem. And most of those systems spit everybody out into the downtown where they want to be, and then you just got a schmozzle of thousands of these high-tech vehicles trying to find a place to park.
Thank you for tuning in to our first episode of CityCast. Stay tuned for more episodes and make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at CityLAB SIR. See you soon.